Let's talk about the best new treasure cards to pick in the Dalaran Heist.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right, folks. I'm going to be ranking the new Dalaran Heist treasures from weakest to strongest, and in fact, naming my top 5 treasures at the end of this video. But before I jump in, I just want to say there's a lot of subjectivity in a video like this. So a lot of this comes down to personal preference and playstyle, but beyond that, in any given run, the treasure that works best for your deck or your run can vary a ton. So just because I'm giving you a list here talking about sort of averages or things you might want to consider, that doesn't always apply perfectly. So if you've had a card work successfully in your run in the past, it might show up in a weird spot on this video. Otherwise, you might have had something completely fail. And when you're going into your runs in the future, you still have to consider a lot of different aspects about how well these things synergize with your deck. So this is not like a catch-all perfect answer sort of video, but it will be a general guideline that can help you make decisions on average and point you in the right direction from time to time. So that said, let's go ahead and talk about these cards. Since I can't talk about every card in great detail here because there's a lot of new treasures in Dalaran Heist, I'm going to rank these in a few different ways, starting off with some of the cards I think are on the weak side of things. These are cards that generally aren't going to be that awesome unless you just have something that's like perfect for your deck. So for instance, Sow the Seeds. I've seen some people use this card successfully, but a lot of the times it's just too slow as a 5 mana card, and then you have to draw minions in your deck to get those buffs into play. So it just feels like a really slow, low impact kind of card. Over multiple turns, you might finally see some reward. Now that said, if you have something like Robes of Gaudiness that discounts your cards, or if you have something that draws you a ton of low cost minions that are buffed, then of course Sow the Seeds could work well. But for the average deck, I don't really think it synergizes with a lot of synergies. If you look at something like Orb of the Untold, it's just raw damage output, and it's not usually enough to finish off late run bosses that have huge health pools, right? Things like Loyal Henchman, another card that just takes way too long to make an impact. So all of these are things that just don't do things fast enough, or they don't do enough, or have some kind of downside, like Master Scheme, for instance, which I think a lot of people like, but I can see some really big downsides with the card like Master Scheme. Top decking, it's bad. Beyond that, sometimes the card draw can actually be more of a liability than an advantage. So for one reason or another, I think all of these cards lack something or cause problems in some scenarios, and that's why they fall into the weak category. Moving on here to cards I'm calling situational. Now, these are sometimes still rather weak. If you look at something like Elistra the Immortal, for most decks, she's going to be one of the worst treasures you can pick. But occasionally, when the situation lines up perfectly, these have game-winning sorts of impacts, which the cards on the previous slide often don't. So Soul Reaper Scythe, if you get this early in a run, can be fantastic. But if you get it late in a run, situationally, it might be pretty bad. So sometimes good, sometimes amazing. Murgatha, if you have a lot of low-cost cards, can be wonderful. But if your deck is full of like 8 drops, Murgatha is probably not going to go far enough in late runs. So these are the sorts of things that, yeah, if your deck supports it, or if you have some really crazy synergy, they might be game-winning or run-defining sorts of cards, but otherwise can be tough. Like Dagwick Sticky Toe, for instance, I had a run where I had permanent stealth, and if Dagwick Sticky Toe has permanent stealth instead of just regular stealth, well, you're just melting through your opponent's cards, and that's amazing. So just keep an eye out for these and lining up some really powerful 2 or 3 card combos, and suddenly they might be enough to win you an entire run. So now let's move on to some strong treasures. And I think these are cards that are, generally speaking, good on their own. They maybe don't require a lot of synergies to work, or they just do something that's really powerful and can swing a game or sometimes save a run. So for instance, with the Muscle, this is a really high tempo card. It can backfire and give you some weak stuff, but you're still often getting 3 or 4 minions out of this guy immediately that you want to play. And sometimes you'll just get home run style cards too. So to me, it's a card that's worked out really well. Now, you're not going to pick this over certain other things, but it's one of those safe picks that any given run, it's probably going to be good. The same could be said for cards like Anoyo Horn or Dream Grove Ring. Although they're late game cards, they could just give you enough board presence that's all you need. And Anoyo Horn in particular can be a really defensive tool as well, which is nice. Then you look at things like Gnomish Army Knife. It's a swingy card. You can win games outright with it. You can gain a lot of life. It can be a defensive tool. Whatever you need it to be, it's got that ultimate flexibility. Hyper Blaster, a great early game tempo management card. Elder Tagoag, same thing, great board clear that just keeps coming back to your hand, particularly if you have a deck without a ton of cards or a lot of card draw. This one can keep cycling back and getting you really big returns. And then Grimmer Patron, fantastic early board minion regardless, which is important in the Dalaran Heist. Like, you have to get early boards. And if you have buff cards, this thing just goes absolutely insane. As long as you can make it even better than it is, it's a defining sort of card in a run. So all of these, one way or another, are either independently good or just do something really, really nice or give you some early significant board presence, all of which are things that you're going to need in both normal and heroic modes for Dalaran Heist. So you really just can't go wrong with any of these choices unless something better is out there. So now let's move on to the top 5 to talk about these cards in a little bit more detail. We have Evil Propaganda here at the number 5 spot, and this is a 10 mana card, which in many cases is a little bit slow, I think, particularly in the earlier bosses. You're almost never getting to the point where you have 10 mana, but keep in mind that usually you don't worry a lot about the earlier bosses. You're trying to win the big games against the harder late run bosses, and something like Evil Propaganda can help a lot because it is the perfect board swing. It is the ultimate 7 minion mind control, right? No matter how far behind you get, as long as you have 10 mana, Evil Propaganda can immediately pull you back into the game and save runs. And I think cards like that are really important. You don't always need these big, heavy home run style cards. If you have a good deck, your good deck can just win, but having that in a pinch emergency sort of card like this can go a long way if you do just happen to run into some bad luck. Your opponent does something sneaky, crazy good. Cards like this help solve those problems, and that's why I like it so much. Now, when you combine this with cost discounts as well, which are certainly abundant and possible across a variety of different passives and other treasures and things like Bob giving you 0 mana spells, something like this gets even crazier to have in your deck. So when those line up, this is just a nutty sort of choice. And I think playing for those really big moments can be important when you're down and out in heroic mode in particular. So that's why I like Evil Propaganda so much. Moving on to the number 4 spot here, I have Case Study. And this is one that has very rarely failed me. Now, you discover a quest reward. The quest rewards are, of course, the Journey to Unguro legendary quest rewards. So, for instance, you might get Sulfuros, a nice 4/2 weapon that turns your hero power into an 8 damage random ping. You might get something like Hunters, Carnassus, and shuffle 15 Raptors into your deck that just cycle into a ton of minions. You guys probably know the quest rewards. If not, almost all of them are good. There are a couple that aren't always the strongest, but because you're discovering and getting to pick one of 3, there really aren't any 3 quest reward scenarios that are all just completely garbage. You're going to get one that works pretty well, and sometimes you're going to get the perfect one that's the exact answer to the scenario you need. And I think often Sulfuros, the warrior reward for a ton of damage and board clear, is really powerful. So that one's a good one to pick. I've also had a lot of luck with Queen Carnassus too. So regardless, there are a lot of good choices to take with Case Study, and because it's so cheap and flexible, you can often just play this on turn 1 if you have nothing else to do. And sometimes just getting that 5 mana 8/8 on a handful of the different quest rewards is also really nice too. Just a big minion on turn 5 that can make a nice impact on the game. So all around, just a very consistent kind of card that you're going to get fairly predictable results from, and it's going to be something that has a positive impact on the game. Also, I just think it's a lot of fun too. So Case Study, it's not that home run card necessarily, but it's perfectly consistent and still gives you opportunities to make big plays, and that's why it's here. Up next to the number 3 spot, I have Super Simian Sphere, and this one surprises me, to be honest, even though I made the list. I'm still a little shocked that Super Simian Sphere landed so high on the list, but it turns out having an immune 5/5 on board is actually really, really powerful for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes it's just a great board removal tool where you're constantly taking free trades into your opponent's stuff. Sometimes it's shutting down plays from your opponent, particularly in the 5th wing of the Dalaran Heist, which at the point this video is published, not many people have seen yet, but as someone who played it, there's a lot of crazy targeted stuff that happens in the final extra 4 bosses of the 5th wing of the Dalaran Heist. So Super Simian Sphere can come in really handy in those scenarios, but across all wings, it's still really, really good. So shocking to me. If it was like 3 mana, I'd be like, oh, of course, Super Simian Sphere is amazing. At 5 mana for a 5/5, it doesn't inherently feel all that obvious why it's so good, but you kind of just have to trust me on this one. It's really good. It gets in your opponent's way so many times, creates a lot of long-term value. It's very, very hard for them to ever deal with this sort of thing. So across the board, a surprise to me still when I think about it logically, but nonetheless, the proof is in the pudding. The evidence is there. This is a very strong choice. Moving on to my number 2 spot here, I have Big Boomba, a 2-mana removal spell that destroys all minions and then does it again at the start of your next turn. So this is another really powerful swing style card that can bring you back into an unwinnable game. Your opponent has some enormous board. You don't have any way to survive. You play Big Boomba, you pass the turn back to them. Presumably they will build another big board because that's what the computer likes to do, and Big Boomba will destroy it again, or at the very least deny them the opportunity to build a second big board, which means you're going to end up with a totally clear board 97% of the time, and it's going to allow you to swing the game back. This double destroy effect deals with death rattles really nicely too, which is nice. So basically, this is that get out of jail free card again, much like Evil Propaganda, but it's flexible, so you can still like draw cards alongside it. You can still use your hero power. Whatever you need to do, Big Boomba allows you to do it because it's so freaking cheap. Now, admittedly, you are kind of passing that middle turn. You know, if you don't have card draw, if you got 8 mana to float, maybe there's nothing else happening because you're not wanting to play your own minions into your double Big Boomba clears. But most of the time that's fine because you're willing to just reset the board, come back into your turn after all of this is resolved, and then you pull back ahead again. So the flexibility here is really, really nice. The low tempo means you can even do it in the early game if you get super desperate, if they have a really nice like turn 3, turn 4 board. You don't have to wait till turn 10 like with Evil Propaganda. So a very powerful, reliable board clear. And I think when you get behind, that's the worst feeling in Dalaran Heist or any sort of dungeon run style mode. Because sometimes you feel like you just can't do anything. Cards like this prevent that from happening, and that's why it's so good. So finally here at the number 1 spot, I have the Candles, which I think will probably surprise most viewers out there, because when you compare this card to things like Big Boomba or Evil Propaganda that we've talked about a lot, it doesn't seem nearly as universal or swingy or as powerful, but I value this one a little more because of its flexibility and its redundancy. In some cases, you have to make one big play with those other 2 cards, those other 2 removal spells, and kind of go all in and hope for the best. But with the Candles, you have this ability, because of its twin spell, to play it multiple times over the course of a game, which means you can keep things in check a little bit more consistently and reliably. And if you do happen to fall behind a couple times in a game, the Candles can still help you stabilize. There are also some benefits here with spell damage in particular, because this is more of a damage-based card as opposed to just a removal card like the other 2s that can be beneficial. So you still can sometimes, deal 6 damage to the enemy board and clear it if you need to. You can otherwise spread this over 3 or 4 turns. If you need to spread it out, deal once, take a break, deal it again, whatever you need to do. It's more possible to have that flexibility with a Candle. So it's better against a variety of bosses, and it's better across a variety of turns than other cards. And so maybe you need a more manageable early clear on a 4th boss or the 6th boss. Maybe you need 3 of them on the 8th boss. Whatever it is, the Candles can help line it up a little bit better while still not committing a huge amount of mana on any given turn. So to me personally, that flexibility, the ability to make decisions with your turns more readily and over multiple turns, has a lot of value, and it still serves a very swingy sort of purpose. So yeah, I know it's not flashy. I know it's not like the game winningest sort of card, but to me, it's the one that seemingly offered the most consistent amounts of success. And I'm always happy when I get this, and I always feel good playing it. So perhaps I'm overrating it a little in a lot of people's minds, but for me, it works, and it works all the time, and it works well. So sure enough, the Candles, bit of a surprise to everybody, actually taking my number 1 spot. So again, just a reminder, totally subjective list. These are the things that have worked well for me in my runs. You're going to have different results. You might think my list is insane, and I'll probably think your list is insane too. And that's okay, but I'm just hoping to provide a little bit of context and guidance for people out there who really don't have any clue what they're supposed to be doing when it comes to treasures. This video can serve as a little bit of a manual, like, okay, maybe this one on average is a little better. Regis has had some success with it, so on and so forth. And again, just be careful when you pick any sort of card. Don't blindly take these rankings as truth, but instead look carefully at your deck. You got all the time in the world. Make sure you're doing things that have high synergy potentials, combo potentials, and allow you to make big plays. So it's always about fitting it into your deck. There's not just some tier list for treasures necessarily, although this attempts to be a little close to that at the very least. That said, if you guys do think I got something tremendously wrong or tremendously correct, feel free to share that in the comments below. I love to hear your insights, and frankly, people who are watching this video, it's great to get second opinions too. If everybody says you're crazy for putting the candles first, then maybe that'll provide you with some extra insights. So browse those comments if you're looking for more information as well. But until then, thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.